Hello, and welcome to this ECIIA Risk in Focus webinar on supply chain resilience. My name is Gavin Hayes, and I'm Head of Policy and Public Affairs at the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors, UK and Ireland. And I'm delighted to be chairing and moderating today's event. I'm pleased to have you all join us for this insightful session, which delves into the role of internal audit in supporting organisations to navigate and grapple with the ever-evolving landscape of supply chain risks. This webinar could not be more relevant or timely, given the dreadful attacks we've seen on shipping in the Red Sea over recent weeks that are disrupting global supply chains and exacerbating a wide range of interconnected risks. These attacks are threatening the flow of essential goods, creating challenges for business continuity, exacerbating geopolitical tensions, and running the risk of fueling inflation at a time when Europe's economic recovery remains fragile. Indeed, in recent years, supply chain disruptions have become more frequent and complex due to several reasons, which include, but are not limited to, geopolitical shifts, climate change, changes in laws and regulations, cybersecurity threats, and more. Brexit, the COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine, climate-related extreme weather events, and now the attacks on shipping in the Red Sea have all created major challenges for supply chains. Internal auditors have a central role in supporting their organisations to identify, manage and mitigate these risks, and providing assurance that business resilience strategies are robust enough to recover from these disruptions. With the ability to examine all parts of an organisation that are involved in the supply chain, and with their helicopter view, internal auditors are in a unique and strong position to help drive positive action to ensure supply chain resilience. This webinar will explore key aspects of supply chain risk, discussing best practices and the latest trends. Our distinguished panel of experts will share practical insights, examples and strategies to support internal auditors in enhancing their ability to manage, monitor and mitigate supply chain risks proactively. So I'll now ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Peter. So Peter, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Gavin, and hello and welcome to all the participants. We've got an amazing audience today, over 350 people. My name is Peter Elam. I'm the Group Head of Risk and Assurance at Anglo American, which is a global mining company. And I'm also recent past president of the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors and still sit on the council of the Institute. Very pleased to be joining you today.
Lovely, thank you, Peter. Preeta, if I could ask you to introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you. Welcome, everyone. This is Preeta Kumar, and I'm the Associate Director for Audit One, who provide technology risk assurance and audit services to NHS clients within Northeast and North Cumbria. I've got experience of over 20 years working within energy sector, retail sector, and financial technology sectors within UK, US, and India. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Preeta. And last but not least, Fraser, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Gavin, and welcome everyone to the webinar. It's great to be asked to be a participant today. My name's Fraser Paget. I work for BDO, and we're one of the largest audit, accountancy, tax and consultancy businesses globally. I work in the UK division. I head up our supply chain and logistics advisory services. So we work with colleagues in internal audit because we work with clients who outsource their entire internal audit to us. And there we have a co-sourced agreement. I've been in industry for 30 years, worked with retailers, building supplies. So yeah, just looking forward to seeing how today goes and hoping to get some good questions from the audience.
Lovely, thank you, Fraser. So without further delay, let's delve into supply chain risk resilience and look at how internal audit functions can lead the charge in safeguarding organisational success. I will now hand you over to my colleague Mamoon Madassar, who will provide you with an overview of some of the key messages from the chapter on supply chains in this year's Risk in Focus 2020-24 report, as well as provide insights from the roundtable on supply chains that we held last November. Over to you, Mamoon.
Thanks very much for the introduction, Gavin. My name is Mamoon. I'm the Senior Research Executive at the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors, UK and Ireland. Today's presentation, Risk in Focus 2024 Supply Chains Resilience. Supply chain outsourcing and nth party risk is an area of critical risk for many organisations across Europe, with 30% of respondents to the Risk in Focus survey saying it was one of their top 5 risks. This is understandable given some of the more recent geopolitical tensions resulting in global supply chains facing severe disruption due to the world's biggest shipping companies diverting journeys away from the Red Sea. Economic uncertainty has driven the perfect storm of interlocking risks described in last year's Risk in Focus in New Directions in 2023. Organisations are now grappling with an ensuing polycrisis with multiple catastrophic events occurring simultaneously. This presentation will look at supply chain resilience. It will examine some of the interlocking risks with geopolitical and cyber security risks, as well as provide best practice tips in maintaining supply chain resilience. Thank you. So the methodology for Risk in Focus 2024 was as follows. In the first half of 2023, a qualitative survey was distributed amongst chief audit executives by 16 European Institutes of Internal Audit spanning 17 countries. The survey was also conducted in partnership with the European Confederation of Institutes of Internal Auditing, and this survey elicited 799 responses. The topic in this report were determined by the quantitative survey results and the qualitative feedback from the roundtable event and one-to-one interviews. Following the report's publication, a second roundtable on supply chains took place in November last year, exploring supply chain resilience and best practice. This presentation will surmise some of the key findings from that roundtable. Next slide, please. Thank you. So you can see on this graph here the findings from Risk in Focus 2024. The top risk was cybersecurity and data security. This was followed by human capital, diversity, talent management and retention. Changes in law and regulation and macroeconomic and geopolitical uncertainty took third place. And rounding out the top 5 was business continuity, operational resilience, crisis management, and disaster response. So those were the top headlines coming out of Risk in Focus 2024. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Supply chain outsourcing and nth party risk is an area of critical stress for many organisations across Europe, with 30% of respondents to the survey saying it was one of their top 5 risks. CAEs at the Risk in Focus 2024 roundtable agreed that the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and heightened geopolitical tensions between the US and China had complicated international trade and weakened supply chain resilience. Today, as globalization continues to loosen, supplier relationships have become mired in headwinds of last year's perfect storm of interconnected risks. Given the existential nature of this threat, CAE should look to see if the organization's key suppliers, key risks are considered part of the organization's own risk universe. Next slide, please. Thank you. So CAEs agreed that supply chain risk is broadening. Previously, the risk was connected to cost. It was the role of internal audit to ensure that they were financially viable if something went wrong. Then it became about
Otherwise, we can say the recording will be available.
Oh, I think you're on the wrong slide. Thank you. Then it became about navigating quality materials and major disruptive events like the Suez Canal crisis. But it's important to be aware that this risk is evolving. Many organizations are looking at it from the perspective of cybersecurity, rapid generative AI, and IoT. How has supply chain risk increased from an IoT point of view? In recent years, we've seen several high-profile cyber attacks which have resulted in supply chain failure, e.g. the cyber attacks on the third-party payroll software provider of major UK companies like the BBC, Boots and BA. So in this quote, a roundtable participant speaks about the importance of understanding that there is disruption across many supply routes which affects various businesses. This disruption has a knock-on effect which can translate to increased costs. So it's important not to look at supply chain risk as an isolated risk, but overall at a compounded level. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. CAEs agreed that navigating geopolitical tensions wasn't a case of dealing with suppliers, but markets in general. In terms of supply and raw materials that are purchased, CAEs must ensure that they comply with certain legislation which can result in losing certain markets. In recent years, we've seen several geopolitical events that have impacted supply chains. These included Brexit, the war in Ukraine, and tensions between the US and China. And more recently, the Red Sea attacks and the Israel-Gaza conflict. In this quote, a roundtable participant provides an example of analysing the situation following the outbreak of the Israel-Gaza conflict. Because they had an existing framework following the Ukraine war, they were able to determine that this would not have a major supplier impact on their business. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Supply chain legislation is changing the way many organizations are working. We're seeing new legislation being introduced like Germany's Supply Chain Act and Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Audit committees are supervising to ensure there are dedicated task force to address new legislation around sustainability. Internal auditors check to see if controls are effective, and if not, they recommend adequate controls to make sure they are effective. Audit committees are asking questions about sustainability, ensuring supply chains are sustainable and in line with regulation, ultimately creating more work. In this quote, so previously it used to just be about cost and quality, but now it's about much more. The processes aren't formalized in the same way as other risks. For example, ESG is having to comply with legislation, which makes it more of a challenge. In this quote, a roundtable participant talks about supply chain risk becoming a dedicated area of strategic business risk, discussed by audit committees in the same way that other areas like cyber are discussed. Can I have the next slide, please? Best practice on supply chain risk. Having visibility of the supply chain cycle and understanding that it needs to be looked at from a geopolitical, climate, cybersecurity, business continuity, and environmental point of view. Scenario planning is a must. simulate those disruptions to understand the impact, ensure you have a short-term and long-term strategy in place. Supply chain is mentioned throughout all chapters in Risk in Focus 2024, so it's important to understand that this risk does not sit in a silo. Identify mitigation measures. This could include promoting processes with less waste or ensuring that you diversify your supply needs. Slice the topic. It's a huge topic. It needs to be made smaller, and internal auditors need to be aware of how fast it's changing. To add value, internal auditors need to make sure that they're not afraid to ask questions we haven't asked before. So that's it for this presentation. I'm going to hand back to Gavin. Thank you.
Maamoun, thank you so much for that insightful overview of supply chain risk and, you know, some of the great insights from this year's Risk in Focus report, as well as the roundtable that we held last November. Before I ask some kick-off questions for the panel, just to remind you that you can also ask your own questions using the Slido function. As the panel begin to respond to some of the initial kick-off questions, we do encourage you to also ask your own questions. So first question for our panel. How can internal audit contribute to supporting their organisations to be prepared for potential supply chain disruptions caused by cyber attacks? And what is the role of internal audit in evaluating the effectiveness of controls related to cybersecurity in support of managing and mitigating supply chain risks? So I think this question really links to some of the points that Maamoun was making around, you know, some of the high-profile cyber attacks that we've seen here in the UK, including on third-party software provider, you know, of the BBC, Boots, British Airways. So Peter, perhaps if we could start with you, what are your thoughts and insights on this?
Yes, thanks, Gavin. So yeah, we're starting with one of the tougher questions, which is how to guard against cyber attacks. I think the first thing that internal audit can do is to make sure that the organisation has conducted a really thorough risk assessment. And where would you start with that? Well, you would start first of all by trying to understand which parts of your supply chain or which aspects of your supply chain are vulnerable to a cybersecurity attack, and of course, don't forget the cybersecurity attack could be on you, could be on your supplier, could be on your supplier's supplier, or some aspect of the ecosystem where your supplier sits. So it's quite difficult to do that conclusively. But I think what you want to do is encourage the organisation to be looking at that and then look at it on a continuous basis. Now, some organisations will be doing that already. I'm sure the NHS is doing that already, but maybe Peter can tell us more. Some organisations maybe not. And then I think the key role for internal audit is probably to sort of kick off that exercise of doing a really good risk assessment. I think once that's been done, we can look at are there then policies, procedures to that are fit for purpose to manage those risks, and potentially could do some assurance on the design around those. And then lastly, once all of that is in place, the risks are identified, good policies, procedures, systems, then you could do what would be more of a kind of classic audit, which is see whether these things are actually in place in practice, whether they're working properly, et cetera. But I think it all really starts with the risk assessment. If the risk assessment hasn't been done thoroughly with a degree of imagination, then whatever controls are put in place will be flawed, and obviously whether or not the controls work will be of limited interest because they may not be the right controls.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Peter, for sharing your insights and advice there. Preeta, perhaps if we could go to you next, and if you could share some advice and insights from the public sector. Obviously, Audit One do a lot of work for the National Health Service here in the UK, but we've also seen, major cyber attacks on the Irish health system, for example, but also cyber attacks on the NHS as well. There have been linked, I believe, to suppliers. So yeah, I'd be fascinated to hear what insights you have to share.
Sure, thank you, Gavin. So like Peter mentioned, the first and the foremost step in this is the risk assessment and identification. So when you ask this question, there are two facets to it. One is how internal audit can basically help prepare the organization in these areas. And the other one is how do we evaluate this? So in terms of helping prepare, is the risk assessment and identification is absolutely the key. Then is the policy and procedures, where internal audit can effectively assess how the implemented policies are tailored to mitigate cyber risk in the supply chain, which includes several areas like secure communication, data protection, incident response, all the usual areas within this. And these are the basics, basically back to basics. The next area I would say is the incident response and planning, which is all towards internal audit contribution to formulation of some of the key specific cyber incident response plans. So basically auditing those areas and connecting it back to the supply chain process, which is basically auditing or evaluating roles and responsibilities, what are the communication strategies, etc., in the event of a cybersecurity incident affecting the supply chain. Supply risk management is another area where internal audit can greatly collaborate with procurement, supply chain management teams, to ensure that cybersecurity considerations are integrated within that supply selection process. Again, back to basics, but really key in ensuring that internal audit assess that. So basically, having relevant clauses in the contract so that internal audit can help manage and mitigate risk in those areas. Continuous monitoring and auditing is another area where there are several opportunities for internal audit to kind of contribute cyber threats in real time. Training and awareness is, I would say, is another area, just to kind of close loop it at all, is to ensure that internal audit assess the cybersecurity awareness programs, specifically ensuring that the employees who are involved in supply chain are well informed about the potential cyber threats and best practices. In terms of the second part of your question, in terms of evaluation itself, assessing the control framework assessment. So this is assessing management's self-assessment of their internal control framework, which ideally should have all those specific cybersecurity controls connected with suppliers, needs to be in there. There are several compliance audits which internal audit can do in terms of cybersecurity in various different areas within the supply chain sector. In addition to compliance-based auditing, risk-based auditing is the key, where you're not looking at risk in isolation, you're looking at risk across the business. And I guess we have covered, I know there are areas, very specific areas within data protection and encryption, which I'm sure technology auditors are well capable of assessing the controls in those areas to kind of look at various facets within supply chain. I think towards the end, I like to just say that collaboration between various teams is absolutely the key. And internal audit can actually take those insights with those, because they have those high-level view within working with various different businesses within the organization or teams within the organization, is for them to kind of, they can collaborate closely, specifically between the IT and security teams, and also the business teams, to kind of collect the insight and align those technical realities, basically, so that they can contribute to the overall assessment of the controls.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Preeta, for that comprehensive answer. Lots of insights and advice there. Fraser, what are you seeing? What is BDO seeing across the market in terms of internal audit's approach to cyber attacks and supply chain risk?
It's quite interesting. I picked up on a word Peter said, imagination, because I think you've got two elements of imagination. You've got the hackers and the people who are trying to gain your data and your information and use that as an advantage. And then you've got the supply chain operatives and directors and chief operating officers who are managing their supply chains. And they're both quite imaginative people. They've had to be over the last 5 years. And what we find is that within supply chain is because it wasn't always at the forefront that it is now in businesses, it kind of slipped under the radar, and a lot of people introduced systems as add-ons that wasn't necessarily on the group's IT register or audit register. So because we're creative, we'll put tachograph systems in, we'll put route planning systems in. So they need to be monitored closely. So when you're going in to do an audit and of your cyber and of your supply chain, is make sure you actually know every system that's out there, because there's probably a lot you don't know about. That would be my first call out to all you internal auditors. And then the second one really is people think about it as people sitting behind a screen hacking your information. We recently completed an audit for a major retailer and in their supply chain and logistics, and we use a lot of temporary labour in this industry. So one of our auditors, well, one of our crack team, we do this as a service. We gained a temporary job at an agency. We went on site, we cloned one of the other colleagues' passes, we got access out of ours, we took our laptop in, and we gained access to all of our systems. It's fair to say they failed that penetration test. But people just think of it as a physical, somebody sitting at the end of a screen. It's the in-person controls as well. How do you know who is in your stores, if you're a retailer, who is in your manufacturing establishments, if you use a lot of temporary labour, which again, a lot of retailers do. So I think what we're seeing is more and more is you need a joined up approach between the physical and the digital cyber security. And you need to be imaginative. You need to get expert advice. Because audit has traditionally not looked at supply chain and logistics, and that's where we've come in and said, actually, we need to get experts in to say, how do we do that? And that's what we do at BDO. We assist businesses on doing that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Fraser. So I'm going to move to the next question now. And just to give you warning, Preeta, I'll start with you next, if that's okay. So the question is, what strategies do you employ to identify geopolitical risks that may impact your supply chain risk? And how can internal audit add value in assessing the resilience of the supply chain in the face of geopolitical uncertainty? I mean, obviously, we've had quite a lot of geopolitical events over the last few years. Here in the UK, obviously, we had Brexit. One could argue that the COVID-19 pandemic was, in a sense, a geopolitical event in terms of the response to it. And since then, we've obviously had the war in Ukraine. As Mamoun was alluding to, we've had the Israel-Gaza conflict that's ongoing. And now we've got the attacks in the Red Sea in terms of shipping lanes. So, a huge amount going on in geopolitical terms that's really impacting global supply chains. So it would be good to get your thoughts and insights on this.
Sure. Thank you, Gavin. So not specifically talking about NHS, because we've discussed COVID-19 quite a lot in detail. And I know for sure NHS are still dealing with some of the post-pandemic challenges. But based on my experience working within different geopolitical sectors, I think there are a few strategies which we can utilize to identify some of those geopolitical risks, which is probably first part of your question. So again, evaluating political stability, understanding the regulatory environments across the global presence which your organization has is quite the key in there. And again, this also starts with the specific in-country risk assessments. Now, we can also do this we can make this activity more active by leveraging what are the news sources, what are the intelligence reports, what are the developments across the geopolitical profile within those different sectors where your respective organizations are connected to. I would say from a mitigation point of view, diversification of the supplier will greatly reduce the dependency for a single region. It's kind of making sure that we've got alternative supply sources, and it's more flexible supply chain to make it more resilient. We also talk about, when we kind of look at this, we also, in the past, we've worked on making sure that regulatory landscape analysis and scenario planning, which is conducting tabletop exercises to simulate some of the responses and geopolitical challenges, just to kind of assess how prepared you are within your specific sector. And within this question, obviously, the most important thing, because this is very specific to tailor to how internal auditors can add value, is again probably evaluating or conducting when you look at risk assessments, when you kind of audit risk assessment within supply chain or across the risk assessment of the organization, when you audit that process, is making sure that the risk assessment is connected, like how Fraser said. Sometimes the reality is different from where you are. It's just making sure that link is there. From a geopolitical point of view, the policies should mention, if you've got global presence across different countries, just the policy should have that very clearly mentioning that how you're catering to those kind of specific alignment in terms of those practices. Again, enhanced due diligence. We're not talking about basic due diligence, we're talking about enhanced due diligence to ensure what criteria do you have to evaluate the geopolitical environment of various supplier locations. This would definitely give you some early warning, just kind of making sure you've got some early warning signs. There are various ways, obviously lots of technological enhancements where you can do some real-time monitoring. And again, just making sure the training and awareness programs are clear enough so that the employees with the knowledge and skills, they can navigate the geopolitical risk or challenges effectively. And making sure you've got the right reporting and communication so that any risks which are identified in the risk register are reaching up to the right exec level, so that you've got top management support at the right time.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Preeta. Fraser, if we could go to you next, please.
Yeah, I think this is one of the most challenging areas we face at the moment, because we are we trade globally, don't we? Most businesses now trade globally, and there's been a lot of talk about nearshoring and offshoring, and then the visibility of that. And I think most businesses start with procurements. You procure, you know where your goods are coming from, but that's really the level one. So I think at level one within supply chain, most businesses now have a good idea, because of what's happened over the last 5 years, of where their goods are actually being sourced from. When you get down to tier 2 and tier 3, and if you're in engineering and manufacturing like Peter is, if you get down to those tier 3 and tier 4s, there's certain suppliers that you're reliant on which you probably aren't aware of, and that becomes very challenging. And I really haven't got a definitive answer. There is a lot of software out there. It is developing rapidly. It does enable you to get that tier 1 and some tier 2 and some tier 3, but then you've got to invest in the people who are analysing that data from that technology to say, what is this telling me? And I just think going forward, this will be the one area businesses will have to make a strategic decision. Am I going to plough a lot of money in it, or am I going to plough a lot of money on becoming more efficient? And it's a dilemma now businesses have got between efficiency and resiliency. And I know we're talking about resiliency in the supply chain, but it's no good being resilient and not being cost effective and having good margins and a profitable, sustainable business. So a lot of innovation in this area, and Peter, I don't know if you're seeing this, but how you audit it is very challenging. We always start at procurement. Have you got all those in place? Do you audit your suppliers? Do they do their risk assessments? But then we follow it through the chain to say where are the goods the components being sourced from.
Brilliant. Thank you, Fraser. And last but not least, Peter, what are your thoughts on this? And I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts, because obviously you lead the audit function at Anglo American, which is you know, a global mining company. So I would have thought that a lot of these geopolitical events will have really impacted your business over the last 3 or 4 years.
Yes, they certainly have. And I mean, I've always worked in global companies. I've also lived abroad and several continents, and my studies were more in politics than in accounting. So geopolitics I find fascinating, and I think what's remarkable about geopolitics is that when big events happen, usually people didn't predict them. So I'm not necessarily going to talk up the skills of those who study geopolitics, but I think for that reason, when you come as internal audit, it can be a bit intimidating to start thinking about talking about geopolitics. You think, well, where on earth do I start? Or, you know, you may fear a discussion with supply chain about, I don't know, China, Taiwan. How on earth can you know anything about that compared to what they may know about? I think the simple thing to do is to look at your company's own statements in the annual report about geopolitical risk, and if you don't have such statements, speak to your board, speak to your senior executives as high up in the organization as you can, really, about what do they see as the key geopolitical risks, and then take those. So don't invent any geopolitical risk, but take the ones that have already been stated by your organization, and then see if you can trace them through the activities and the planning, the risk planning done by the supply chain part of the business, but also the main part of the business, because what you usually find, even in a company like Anglo American, which where we even have to some degree our own geopolitical analysis, what you usually find is that these things are not really being fed through into the organization. So people 1 level, 2 level, 3 levels into the organization have not incorporated these risks into their analysis. And a very easy thing you can do is internal audit, is just do an audit on the degree to which certain geopolitical risks have been properly integrated into the planning of the supply chain organization or the key parts of the business that are supply chain dependent. And I'm sure you'll find that in many cases they haven't. I think that's probably where I would start. And then if they have been incorporated into the risk thinking, then, as I said earlier, you can go a level deeper. You can look at the procedures, and then you can look at the controls. But I'm sure you'll be able to make some observations already at the top level about whether they've been integrated at all.
Thanks, Peter. And presumably you use scenario planning for geopolitical risks.
We do, and I used to work for Shell and even worked on some scenario planning. I'm not, although I'm personally a great fan of scenario planning. I love it. I mean, I think it's really interesting work to do. It's very complex for most people to be able to kind of take properly on board. The real merit in scenario planning is actually quite a simple one, which is to try to push people to think about what might happen if the world, if the world really is different tomorrow from how it is today, and what might, what parts of their organization, their supply chain might come under stress. So I think a simpler way of considering scenario planning, which is a very complex activity in and of itself, is just to come up with kind of what if questions. What if there was a war between China and Taiwan, and there were sanctions on China, and we couldn't source some of our key stuff from China. That's a fairly simple, plausible kind of what-if question. Now, again, I'm not convinced that internal audit should be the one inventing the what-if questions. I think you should rather you can pose the questions based on stuff that's already kind of in the annual report. So the annual report might say, we have a lot of supply from China, and one of our risks is that is conflict between China and Taiwan. So all you need to do, spot that in the annual report, and then put and then tag a what if question to it, and then put that to management in the relevant area of your organization, and suddenly you come across as being geopolitically very well informed.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Peter. So I'm going to move to the final kickoff question. And if it's okay, I will go to you first, Fraser. So how does the internal audit function help organisations to prepare for changes in laws and regulations that impact supply chain risk, and in particular concerning climate change and sustainability legislation? And how has this impacted your supply chain resilience? So over to you, Fraser.
Yeah, I think the whole ESG, and I think what Peter just articulated, it kind of goes hand in hand with the what if scenarios. We have an ESG hub within BDO, so we have dedicated resource to make sure we're accountable for our net zero journey. And then we also consult with other businesses, and we get a newsletter every week, and we publish data on the website. But there literally is 6 or 7 different directives coming from US, Europe, UK every week. So to really pinpoint what's pertinent to my business is difficult. And I think the role of internal audit is almost to, again, work with their business departments cross-functionally to say, how does this impact me? Am I en route for our own journey? So because I mean, every business now, when you go to tender, I worked for the government a couple of times, and 20% of the scoring is now on your ESG credentials. So you have to be credentialise what you're doing to get to net zero, and BDO does that. And then it's how we keep up with that legislation. So Europe last week introduced a new directive banning greenwashing. So all the time you've got the what am I doing, what legislation is coming, and how do I comply with that? And it's a very challenging environment we're in at the moment with that ESG reporting. So what we do is we horizon scan, we look forwards, we do some scenario planning, what if. We then we make sure our own credentials, and we're tracking against them, and we've got the right governance in place. So have you got a sponsor for your ESG? Have you got committees? Have you got a short term and a long term to get to net zero? And then how the internal auditors can work with the different business streams to make that come to life. Because to me, ESG is about making the whole complex simple, achievable, measurable, and then people want to know that they're being told the truth. So, you've got to give it in such a way that it's ethical as well. So we do this through an ESG hub, and then working with the financial teams, the supply chain teams, because you've got to have a joined up approach on ESG. It can't be done in silos.
Thanks, Fraser. And before I ask Peter to provide his thoughts and insights, a quick reminder to our audience to please do submit your questions via the Slido function. I did just have a little look. I've not yet seen any questions. So yeah, if you do have your questions, then please do submit them to Slido. But Peter, what are your thoughts and insights around how internal auditors support their organisations to prepare for, new laws and regulations that impact supply chains, particularly in relation to ESG, as Fraser was just saying?
So the internal audit is not usually the first part of the organisation to learn about new laws and regulations, and I don't think we should try to be. But again, there'll be a part of your organization which does that, and the key thing really is to check with them what's coming, and then see really what is the process between them and the relevant other parts of the organization to prepare for the legislation. See if that is working. That's really what I would focus on. And then if you have significant areas of higher risk, then it would be possible to do some focused audit work to see, well, at a much more detailed level, what is the level of preparation. But I would kind of start at the source, being whoever in the organization works on new laws and regulations, and then kind of work my way into the rest of the organization.
Brilliant, thank you, Peter. And presumably this is where the collaboration piece comes into play, you know, in terms of internal audit, collaborating with colleagues in legal and compliance, risk management, and so on. Yeah. I mean, I think we all hope these days that as a function we're part of the leadership of the company. We're not sort of somewhere off on the side, knocking on the door and trying to get in. I think if you find yourself on the side knocking on the door trying to get in, you probably need to have a different conversation with the chair of your audit committee and with whichever senior executive is your administrative manager. Yeah. Because you're kind of you're probably in the wrong place. Thanks very much, Preeta. Yeah. And Preeta, last but not least, you know, what are your thoughts and insights on this question from a sort of public sector point of view? Presumably there are lots of laws and regulations that, you know, the public sector organizations, particularly National Health Service, you know, have to comply with, particularly in the sort of ESG space.
Yes, definitely. And as Peter said, it's probably not easy for internal auditors, and internal auditors shouldn't be the first point of contact for making sure those laws, regulatory environment is updated. So I'd say, in my experience, always having that conduit or liaison with the compliance team, the legal and compliance team. So these are those kind of collaborations which are outside your audit plan. So just maintaining that monthly or quarterly meetings in my practice. And I used to work with energy sector just before joining NHS 2 years back. And ESG was one of the critical areas of reporting for them. And like Fraser alluded, there were challenges, and ensuring that mapping exercise and having that regular monthly or quarterly meetings with them to see what is changed from a regulatory landscape. And also making sure for internal auditors, if there are any changes, if the regulatory landscape has changed massively, making sure that we connect that with the audit plan, because our audit plan should be dynamic in nature. So when you kind of do within NHS, we within Audit One, we every 6 months we review the audit plan to see what has changed, what kind of has there any new regulatory risk which has been added, or has there any new compliance risk which we need to kind of focus on, where we need to work on and need to get added into the audit plan. So we need to be really very dynamic in nature as internal auditors or an internal audit function, to kind of keep in touch with those relevant stakeholders, which includes the ESG team, the team in legal and compliance, and any other teams which are kind of connected with these kind of areas, and then making sure that we connect that with our audit plan, or we kind of create a bit of a connect the lines or connect the dots as internal audit providers.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Preeta. So let me just double check on Slido to see if we've had any more questions come in. Otherwise, I might have to. Yes, we do have some questions. Excellent. Right. I've had a very interesting question from someone on a sort of anonymous basis. It's a fun question given everything going on in US politics at the moment. But the question is, should internal audit procedures factor in different scenarios for Trump's trade policies impacting EU supply chains? And if so, to what degree? Which of our panelists would like to go first on this question? Peter, sorry to pick on you, but do you have any thoughts on this? I mean, you know, obviously Anglo-American is, you know, is a global mining company. Presumably, you know, if Trump does get elected, then you know, potentially Anglo-American could be impacted quite by, you know, Trump's trade policies. Should internal audit be factoring this in as a sort of scenario?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess the first response is that I think the whole experience with Trump is that you don't really know what he's going to do. So for anybody to try to predict or speculate how Trump's trade policies may impact the EU supply chains I think is a stretch. But I think more seriously, I mean, there are lots of things that you could do. Lots of scenarios you could come up with to kind of test your supply chain colleagues or your business colleagues. I wouldn't do that. I would keep it simple, and start with the things that you've heard from the board, or from, you know, on good authority from the board, from senior management, are things that are worrying them. Because don't forget, the purpose of our work is to give the board and senior management assurance on the key risks for the company. So they need to recognize that whatever questions we're asking are relevant and interesting. Now, if this is the key question, Trump's trade policies, then fair enough. But otherwise, I would refrain, and I would ask the ones that are on their minds.
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter. Fraser, do you have anything to add on this question from a BDO point of view?
It's quite, I mean, it's a tongue-in-cheek question, but also I think a lot of businesses are looking at how they do relocate manufacturing to the US or Mexico or South America, because I think America is becoming more insular. So I think a lot of, and this is more of a strategic answer than an internal audit, but it's kind of how you maximise that within your strategic, and then how that affects your internal audit process. But we are seeing, especially in manufacturing, a lot of people look at opening up facilities in North America or South America to alleviate that Europe. And I don't think there's a tension between Europe, but just to really reevaluate their supply chains. We saw a lot of UK companies opening up facilities in Europe post-Brexit. So again, I think it's all part of that strategic, and then it's how IA support that and makes that succeed by helping along the journey.
Thanks, Fraser. Preeta, do you have anything more to add to this from a public sector point of view?
No.
That's okay. Let's move to the next question. How do you see exit planning as part of supply chain risk management, especially related to IT suppliers? Preeta, would you like to try and tackle this one?
Yes, I can try. So when you mean to say exit planning, that is exiting a particular supply, I'm assuming. And obviously the first area is to kind of look at the contract, what's there, what do we have, how do we have an exit strategy? If not, then understand from the current supplier that what is the cost of helping us do the exit strategy, or helping your specific organization do the exit strategy. Definitely looking at the legal and regulatory side. During that exit strategy or exit management, understanding what transition plan you have from if you're transitioning to a new IT supplier. Where I have seen, and in fact, where I'm working currently within NHS as part of internal audit, I do see data migration is probably one of the key areas which probably can pose some level of challenge, especially we work towards a lot of cloud providers there. And when we talk about cloud providers, obviously it kind of complicates. You're talking about software as a service model in majority of the cases where probably IT are not closely involved. It's coming from the business side, and business probably doesn't understand the implication of data migration. So probably understanding that data migration aspects, because that's one of the key things which sometimes fail when we kind of move from one supplier to another, specifically in an IT scenario. I guess financial implication is something which we always consider. Ensuring that the documentation and records are updated so that you know what the current supplier has provided, what service, what's there, and making sure that you evaluate. You need to have that implementation team to kind of see that you're not taking any bad practices across to new supplier. So making sure as part of the exit plan, you're considering any process improvements, enhancements, because that's exactly the right time, so that you're not taking any kind of process which are outdated or not relevant or obsolete into the new supplier framework. So yes, I think that's probably the high level within that. There's quite a lot of details. Obviously, like I said, data migration is a very, very technical area where there are kind of various different facets which we can look at if you want to look at exit planning.
Yeah, thank you very much, Preeta. Peter, what are your thoughts on this one?
I was hoping you were going to go to the next question.
Okay. Well, yes,
I've done. Sorry, Gavin, if I can jump in just on this one.
Yeah, please do.
I think if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. If you're doing a major IT swap out, most people will swap an ERP system out within their lifetime of working. And I've done many of them as consultancy roles and looking at the supply chain element. How does it affect my warehouse systems, my transport systems, my forecasting systems? And if it can go wrong, it will. So you need, as an IA team, to ensure that you're auditing that project, every step, every gateway, every milestone, that it's realistic. Because normally, with these sort of projects, you'll have an end date and it'll be end date driven, which it shouldn't be. It should be task driven. So I think with this, every type of risk, it should be the biggest risk register you can ever have, and it should be the most in depth, and it should be audited by the internal audit team on a regular basis for whole project governance, because you'll have a finance team, you'll have an IT team, you'll have an ops team. So it will be a cross business project. So hopefully that helps out.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. There's probably one more thing which I wanted to add is internal audit should be involved at the very initial phase, right at the feasibility stage, when you're kind of planning to decide when you're moving from one supplier to another. So that we know, because some of the suppliers, like big ERP systems, very common within NHS specifically, really major projects, lots of cost involved. A lot of implication, usability, clinical use, all those things needs to be incorporated within the feasibility. And within Audit One specifically, we also do something like a post, once it's migrated, once we kind of move into a new supplier, exited from an old supplier, move into a major transformation project, let's see, we always look at a benefit or a post assessment just to see how that has gone and are there any learnings. So that's very, very soon after you kind of migrate. And then probably after a year or so, we look at benefit realization, because all those benefits which we have initially identified in the business case, is that realized? Now, that's the most difficult one for internal auditors to kind of actually look at, but it's something which is absolutely the key also, to kind of see how effective that overall process has been.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for all of your questions. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, so we do now need to bring the Q&A to a close. So as we have learnt today, businesses are now facing increased supply chain risk exposures. This includes an increase in the frequency of geopolitical events that have the potential to severely impact global supply chains, and this includes the ongoing war in Ukraine and now the attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. Internal audit has a really vital role to play in supporting organisations to manage and mitigate these risks and help to enhance supply chain resilience. After the webinar, if you haven't already done so, then please do download Risk in Focus 2024 for further insights, and it is available on the ECIA website, and it should be also available on your local European Institute website as well. To claim your CPE points, please complete the Slido form, and then those will be issued. So a big thank you to Pascal and the team at ECIA for hosting today's session, as well as to Peter, Preeta, Fraser and Mamoon for sharing your fascinating knowledge and insights, as well as finally a big thank you to all of you for tuning in. Have a good day, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank